The calm before the storm. Michael Carter, the newly appointed police chief of a small town, was finally returning home after a much-needed vacation. The road stretched ahead, framed by tall trees and enveloped in the vibrant colors of late afternoon. As he drove, he felt a sense of peace wash over him, a welcome contrast to the demanding challenges he faced in his position. The sun's golden rays highlighted the landscape, and he breathed in the familiar sense of his hometown, grateful for the tranquility of the countryside. But beneath the surface calm, Michael was acutely aware of the weight of his responsibilities. Being the first black police chief in the town's history was both an honor and a burden. He had worked tirelessly to earn the respect of his community and his officers, navigating the complexities of unspoken prejudices and the high expectations placed upon him. As he reflected on his past struggles and triumphs, a mix of anticipation and anxiety swirled within him. He was ready to tackle the challenges ahead. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the dashboard, but he dismissed it, focusing on the road. The drive was uneventful until a speeding car suddenly swerved into his lane, cutting him off. Startled, Michael's hands tightened around the steering wheel, his heart racing as he narrowly avoided a collision. The reckless driver continued down the road, showing no regard for safety, and a wave of anger surged through Michael. That anger was quickly replaced by a sense of duty. As a police officer, he couldn't let such behavior slide. He pressed the accelerator, determined to catch up with the driver and enforce the law. As he drew closer, he realized it wasn't just a careless motorist. It was an officer of the law, driving recklessly as if above accountability. This infuriated Michael, a man dedicated to justice and integrity. He activated his patrol lights and signaled for the driver to pull over. To his astonishment, instead of complying, the officer's vehicle skidded to a halt, gravel flying in all directions. Michael stepped out of his car, heart pounding not just from adrenaline, but from the apprehension of what was to come. As he approached, two men in police uniforms emerged from the vehicle, their expressions twisted with hostility. "What's your problem?" one officer barked, taking a menacing step toward Michael. Michael's brow furrowed. "I could ask you the same thing. You nearly caused an accident back there." The officers exchanged a glance, laughter spilling from their lips, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a chill down Michael's spine. "Who the hell do you think you are?" one of them sneered, closing the gap between them. Michael took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm Chief Michael Carter of the police department," he replied, his voice steady despite the growing tension. For a moment, there was silence. The officers stared at him, the weight of the moment palpable. But then the first officer scoffed. "Chief of police, right? Sure you are." A sickening feeling twisted in Michael's stomach. He recognized this kind of disrespect all too well. It was the very reason he had taken on this role, to change the narrative, to instill respect and accountability within the force. "I'm warning you, you're making a big mistake," he said, keeping his voice firm. But the officers didn't heed his warning. Instead, they laughed again, this time more maliciously. "People like you don't get to tell us what to do." The second officer spat, taking a step forward, his hand resting on his belt as if preparing for confrontation. Michael's heart raced. The situation was spiraling out of control. He had hoped to diffuse the tension, but their hostility was palpable. "What do you mean, people like me?" he asked, incredulous. The first officer's smirk deepened, revealing a lack of respect that cut deep. "You know what we mean." Before Michael could respond, the first officer lunged at him, shoving him hard in the chest. Caught off guard, he stumbled back, struggling to regain his footing. The second officer joined in, pushing him again with even more force, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. Pain shot through his body as he hit the ground, shock flooding his senses. This isn't just a misunderstanding, Michael thought as he lay there, disbelief washing over him. His own officers, his subordinates, were attacking him, and they didn't even recognize him. As he attempted to rise, One officer delivered a kick to his ribs, a sharp reminder of the danger he was in. "You're going to regret messing with us," the officer snarled, his voice dripping with venom. Gasping for breath, Michael tried to defend himself, raising his hand in a futile gesture. "Stop. I'm your boss," he cried, but his words fell on deaf ears as the beating continued, each blow more painful than the last. As he lay there, battered and bruised, Michael realized this wasn't just an attack, it was an affront to everything he stood for. He struggled to breathe, each inhale sending sharp stabs of pain through his chest. Memories of his training and the oath he took flooded his mind, but the reality of the situation was overwhelming. In that moment of desperation, he made a silent promise to himself. He would rise above this, and he would find a way to expose the truth. He wouldn't allow their hatred to extinguish his spirit. The fight was far from over, and Michael Carter would not back down. Rising from the ashes, as Michael Carter lay on the gravel, battered and bruised, his mind raced with disbelief. How could two of his own officers turn on him so violently, so cruelly? The world around him blurred, the sounds of gravel crunching beneath their boots echoing in his ears. Pain radiated from his ribs and arms, but beneath that pain was a growing fire, a determination to rise, not just for himself, but for the community he had vowed to protect. After what felt like an eternity, the officers finally stepped back, their laughter ringing hollow in the air. The taller officer, the one who had first lunged at Michael, leaned closer, a smirk etched across his face. "You think you can play chief, huh? We'll show you what happens to someone who tries to overstep their bounds," he taunted, and Michael felt a rush of anger wash over him. "I'm your boss," Michael gasped, struggling to find his footing. "I'm the chief of police." But they merely laughed again, as if the title meant nothing to them. It was a stark reminder of the uphill battle he faced in this role. For too long, some officers had operated under a different set of rules, dismissing authority if it didn't fit their worldview. That day, it had become clear that the fight for respect and equality would not just be an abstract struggle, it was personal, and it was here. With sheer willpower, Michael pushed himself up, every movement sending waves of pain coursing through his body. He had to remain focused. He couldn't allow their hatred to define him or his actions. The fight was not just for his dignity. It was for every black officer, for every citizen who had felt the weight of discrimination and bias. Carter took a deep breath, gathering his strength. "This isn't over," he declared, his voice low but resolute. "You will pay for this." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to irritation. They might have thought they could intimidate him, but Michael had no intention of letting their brutality break him. In that moment, a plan began to form in his mind. If they were willing to attack him publicly, then he needed to leverage this situation, not just for his own justice, but to expose the corruption lurking within his own department. The two officers seemed to sense his resolve, but before they could act, Michael turned and hobbled toward his car, each step a battle against the pain that coursed through him. He fumbled for his phone, desperately trying to ignore the searing pain in his ribs. It was crucial to document what had just happened, to have evidence of this brutal assault. As he pulled out his phone, the officers closed in, their shadows looming over him like dark clouds. "What do you think you're doing?" one of them barked, the menace in his tone unmistakable. "I'm calling for backup," Michael replied, his heart pounding. He pressed the call button, the line ringing in his ear as he stared defiantly at the officers. He could see the anger in their eyes, but he also sensed a hint of fear. Perhaps they were beginning to realize that their actions had crossed a line. "Backup," the second officer scoffed, stepping forward aggressively. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just a pathetic little chief trying to play the hero." But just as Michael was about to respond, the call connected. 911. "What is your emergency?" The voice on the other end was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. "Send help immediately," Michael said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm being assaulted by two police officers. His heart raced as he relayed the location and details, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Help was on the way, but it wouldn't arrive in time to stop the chaos that was about to unfold. The officers exchanged panicked glances, realizing that the situation was slipping out of their control. "You shouldn't have done that," the first officer snarled, taking a step toward Michael, his fists clenched. "I have the right to call for help," Michael countered, refusing to back down. The adrenaline coursed through his veins, heightening his senses as he prepared for whatever might happen next. In that moment, the second officer lunged at him, but Michael was ready. Drawing upon his training, he sidestepped the attack, forcing the officer to stumble past him. Without wasting a moment, Michael swung around, delivering a precise kick to the officer's knee, sending him crashing to the ground. But before he could catch his breath, the first officer charged at him, rage fueling his movements. Michael barely had time to react as the officer grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground. "You think you can fight back? You'll pay for this." Just then, the distant sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The officer's grip faltered for just a moment, and Michael seized the opportunity. He pushed away from the officer, breaking free and stumbling backward, breathless but determined. Within moments, a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing and sirens blaring. Relief surged through Michael as he recognized the familiar faces of his fellow officers. But would they believe him? Would they stand with him against the violence of their own? As the new officers emerged, Michael shouted, "They attacked me. These officers are out of control." He pointed at the two men, still on the ground, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. The responding officers exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by the scene before them. They quickly assessed the situation, their expressions shifting to concern as they approached Michael. "Chief Carter, what happened?" "It's them," Michael insisted, gesturing emphatically toward the two officers. "They attacked me without cause. I was just trying to enforce the law." One of the new officers, Officer Sanchez, a seasoned veteran with years of experience, stepped forward. "We need to get you medical attention, Chief," he said, concern etched on his face. "You look hurt." Michael nodded, grateful for the support. "I'm fine, but we need to deal with these officers. This isn't just about me. It's about the integrity of our department." Officer Sanchez turned to the two aggressive officers, who were now rising to their feet, their demeanor shifting from cocky bravado to defensive resentment. "You two are in a lot of trouble," he said, his voice steady but firm. "We're going to need your badges and IDs." "On what grounds?" The first officer spat, a defiant glare in his eyes. "Assaulting the chief of police is a serious charge," Officer Sanchez replied, crossing his arms. "You don't want to make this worse for yourselves." Michael could feel the tension in the air, a palpable mixture of fear and anger radiating from both sides. The two officers exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They could either comply and face the consequences or continue down a path of defiance that would surely end in their dismissal. After a brief moment, the second officer reluctantly removed his badge and tossed it onto the ground. "This is bullshit," he muttered, glaring at Michael as if he were the source of all their problems. The first officer hesitated but eventually followed suit, his expression darkening. "You haven't heard the last of this, Carter," he threatened, venom lacing his words. Michael met his gaze with unwavering determination. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability." He turned to Officer Sanchez, who was already calling for backup. "We need to file formal charges against them. This cannot be swept under the rug." As the additional officers arrived on the scene, Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. The tide was beginning to turn, and he was determined to see this through. He wouldn't allow their actions to go unchecked. He would expose the corruption within the force and work to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. In the following moments, as the officers took statements and began the process of documenting the incident, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that this was only the beginning of a long battle, not just against the officers who had attacked him, but against the systemic issues that plagued the department. It was a fight he was more than ready to take on. "Let's get you looked at, Chief," Officer Sanchez urged, guiding him toward an awaiting ambulance. "You need to make sure you're all right." Michael nodded, grateful for the support, but his mind was already racing ahead. He had plans to implement reforms, to establish a culture of respect and accountability within the department. The fight against racism and discrimination wouldn't be easy, but he had the will to make it happen. As he climbed into the ambulance, he cast one last glance at the two officers, now handcuffed and surrounded by fellow officers. A sense of satisfaction washed over him. Justice was beginning to take shape, and he knew this was just the first step toward a brighter future for the police force, and for the community they served. New resolve. The ambulance's interior was bright and sterile, contrasting sharply with the chaos that had just unfolded outside. As Michael Carter sat on the gurney, a medic assessed his injuries. The adrenaline that had fueled him moments earlier began to fade, and the pain in his ribs and side surged, reminding him of the violent altercation. "Take a deep breath for me," the medic instructed, his hands deftly examining Michael's injuries. "We need to make sure nothing's broken." Michael complied, drawing in a breath that felt like fire coursing through his chest. "I'll be fine," he insisted, gritting his teeth against the pain. He was determined to focus on the road ahead, not on the physical wounds that would heal with time. "I need to get back to the station." The medic raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You just got assaulted, Chief. You need to be checked out properly before you head back." Michael met the medic's gaze, the resolve in his eyes unyielding. "I appreciate your concern, but I can't let this go. We need to start the process of holding those officers accountable." The medic nodded, understanding the urgency but still gently urging caution. "All right, but let's at least get you stabilized. The last thing we want is for you to pass out from the pain." As the ambulance began to move, Michael gazed out the window, watching the world rush by. It felt surreal, the events of the past hour replaying in his mind like a disturbing highlight reel. The familiarity of his town, once a source of comfort, now felt tainted by the betrayal of his own officers. How could this happen? How could he leave a department filled with individuals who harbored such animosity? With each passing moment, Michael's determination grew. This incident had ignited something deep within him, a desire to root out the toxic culture that had taken hold in the department. He wouldn't just be a passive leader, he would be an agent of change. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Michael felt a mix of anxiety and urgency. He needed to focus on gathering evidence against the two officers who had assaulted him. There was no time to waste. As soon as he was discharged, he planned to meet with his team to discuss the next steps. Once inside the hospital, the doctors quickly assessed his injuries. X-rays were taken, and after what felt like an eternity, the doctor returned with news. "You have some bruised ribs, but fortunately, nothing is broken. You'll need to rest for a few days, but you should recover fully." Michael nodded, relieved but also frustrated. "I can't rest. I need to get back to work. This is about more than just me." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "I understand your commitment, Chief, but if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to help anyone else. Your health is important." After a brief consultation, he was discharged with strict orders to take it easy. As he stepped outside, he spotted Officer Sanchez waiting for him, his face a mixture of concern and respect. "Are you okay?" Sanchez asked, his tone serious. "You took a hell of a beating back there." "I'll be fine," Michael replied, though he knew he wouldn't be able to shake off the physical and emotional toll of the incident. "I need to get back to the station and start the process of filing charges against those officers." Sanchez nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll ride with you. We need to make sure this is handled properly." As they drove back to the precinct, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The assault had awakened something within him, a fierce determination to reclaim his authority and foster a culture of respect and accountability within the police department. When they arrived, the precinct was buzzing with activity. Officers were milling about, discussing the latest calls and the ongoing operations. Michael's presence immediately drew attention, and a hush fell over the room. The air was thick with tension as officers whispered among themselves, clearly aware of the incident that had unfolded earlier. "Everyone, listen up," Michael called out, his voice steady and commanding. "I need everyone's attention." The chatter faded, and all eyes turned to him. "Today, something unacceptable happened within our department, and it's time we address it head-on." As he spoke, Michael felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could see a mixture of support and apprehension in the faces of his fellow officers. Some were clearly shocked, while others seemed uneasy, uncertain about how to respond to the confrontation. "I was assaulted by 2 of our own officers," he continued, his voice unwavering. "This is not just a personal attack. It's a reflection of a deeper issue within our ranks. We cannot allow this behavior to go unchecked." The room erupted into murmurs, a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "Who?" someone shouted from the back. "Who did this?" "Officer Reynolds and Officer Jacobs," Michael stated, the names hanging in the air like a weight. "They acted out of hatred and disrespect, and I will not tolerate it. We are going to conduct a full investigation, and I need your support to ensure that justice is served." Sanchez stepped forward, his voice firm. "This isn't just about what happened today. It's about creating a culture where everyone is held accountable, regardless of rank. We need to stand together and make it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." Michael felt a surge of pride at Sanchez's words. This was the kind of leadership he needed, a team willing to confront the hard truths. "I want every officer here to take a stand. If you see something wrong, speak up. We must be united in our mission to serve and protect our community, and that begins within our own department." The officers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. The energy in the room began to shift, as if a collective understanding was forming. They were not just witnesses to an incident. They were a part of a movement toward change. As the meeting progressed, Michael encouraged open dialogue. Officers voiced their concerns, shared experiences of bias, and discussed the need for training on cultural competency and de-escalation techniques. The room buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose, and for the first time in a while, Michael felt hopeful. The meeting concluded with a plan for a series of workshops focused on rebuilding trust within the department. Michael knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a crucial first step. The willingness to confront uncomfortable truths would be the foundation for a more inclusive and respectful culture. As he dismissed the officers, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They were no longer just colleagues. They were allies in a shared mission. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face the challenges head-on. Later that evening, Michael returned home, exhausted but filled with a sense of purpose. He reflected on the day's events, replaying the meeting in his mind. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. He glanced at the photos on his wall, pictures of his family and friends, people who had supported him through thick and thin. They reminded him of why he had chosen this path, why he had fought to become the chief of police. He wanted to create a community where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. As he sat down to eat a simple dinner, Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from colleagues and friends. Many had reached out to express their support, while others shared similar stories of discrimination and bias they had faced in their own experiences. Each message reinforced his determination to effect change. That night, Michael made a vow to himself. He would not only seek justice for the assault he had endured, but also strive to reshape the very fabric of the police department. The fight for equality and accountability was far from over, but he was ready to lead the charge. As he settled into bed, exhaustion enveloped him, but sleep would not come easily. Instead, thoughts of the future danced in his mind. The workshops, the discussions, the unity he hoped to foster among his officers. He closed his eyes, envisioning a department transformed, where respect and accountability were not just ideals but everyday realities. Tomorrow, he would begin laying the groundwork for a new era in policing, one where officers could work together to serve their community without fear of discrimination or bias. And as he drifted off to sleep, Michael felt a flicker of hope igniting within him, a promise that this was only the beginning of a powerful journey toward change. The tipping point. The following morning, Michael Carter awoke to a crisp autumn breeze wafting through his window, carrying with it the promise of change. As the sunlight streamed into his room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The meeting at the precinct had sparked something deep within him, a determination to address the issues that had festered for too long within his department. Today would mark a significant step in that direction. After a quick breakfast, Michael gathered his notes and prepared for the day ahead. He had arranged for a series of workshops aimed at promoting cultural competency, de-escalation techniques, and fostering a respectful environment within the police department. With each passing moment, he felt the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders, but it was a weight he was willing to bear. Upon arriving at the precinct, Michael was met with a buzz of activity. Officers were bustling about, some preparing for their shifts, while others engaged in discussions about the previous day's events. As he stepped into the main briefing room, he found Officer Sanchez already setting up for the first workshop. "Morning, Chief," Sanchez greeted him with a nod. "You ready for this?" "Absolutely," Michael replied, his excitement evident. Today is about opening up the dialogue and laying the groundwork for real change. As officers began to file into the room, Michael felt a surge of anticipation. This was more than just a training session. It was an opportunity for the department to confront its past and work toward a better future. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Once everyone had gathered, Michael took center stage. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I know the past few days have been challenging, but they have also presented us with an opportunity to reflect and grow as a department." He scanned the room, gauging the reactions of his fellow officers. Some looked attentive, while others appeared skeptical, arms crossed tightly over their chests. Michael understood that change would not come easily, but he was determined to break down the barriers of distrust. "Our first workshop will focus on cultural competency," he continued. "We need to understand the communities we serve on a deeper level. This isn't just about policy. It's about empathy and connection." As the workshop progressed, Michael led discussions on various scenarios officers might encounter, emphasizing the importance of recognizing biases and understanding the impact of their actions on the community. He encouraged everyone to share their thoughts and experiences, fostering an open environment. However, as the discussions deepened, some officers began to push back. One officer, a veteran with years of experience, raised his hand. "Why do we need to change how we do things? We've been doing our jobs just fine. This seems like a waste of time." Michael felt a pang of frustration but remained calm. With all due respect, that mindset is precisely what needs to change. Our community is evolving, and so must we. If we want to build trust, we must acknowledge that our past actions have consequences. This isn't just about law enforcement. It's about community relationships. The officer shrugged, a dismissive look on his face. "Sounds like a bunch of liberal nonsense to me." A murmur spread through the room as other officers exchanged glances. Michael sensed the tension rising. This isn't about politics. It's about accountability and respect for every individual, regardless of their background. If we can't embrace that, we risk losing the very foundation of our role as protectors. The room fell silent, and Michael could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He knew he was walking a fine line, but he also recognized that pushing through discomfort was essential for progress. As the workshop continued, Michael introduced role-playing exercises to illustrate how to handle various situations with empathy and understanding. The officers paired up, and as they navigated different scenarios, laughter erupted at times, but the underlying tension remained. It was clear that old habits and prejudices were not easily shed. After the first session concluded, Michael took a break to regroup. He stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, feeling the weight of the day's challenges pressing on him. As he leaned against the wall, he contemplated the road ahead. How could he bridge the divide between tradition and the urgent need for reform? Just then, Officer Sanchez joined him, concern etched on his face. "How do you think it went?" "It's a start," Michael replied, crossing his arms. "But we have a long way to go. Some officers are resistant, and that worries me." Sanchez nodded. "I've noticed. But you're making them think, and that's important. Change doesn't happen overnight." Michael appreciated Sanchez's optimism, but felt the burden of leadership heavy on his shoulders. "I just want to create a department we can all be proud of, a department that stands for justice, integrity, and respect." As they returned inside, they prepared for the next session, this time focused on de-escalation techniques. Michael introduced guest speakers, community leaders and advocates who shared their experiences with law enforcement, highlighting the need for empathy in policing. The stories were powerful, resonating deeply with the officers in attendance. One community leader, a passionate woman named Maria, spoke about her experiences growing up in the town. "For many, the police are seen as protectors, but for others, we feel fear and mistrust. We need to bridge that gap. It starts with understanding and compassion." Her words struck a chord, and as she spoke, Michael could see officers nodding in agreement. He felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they were beginning to realize the importance of building connections within the community. After the workshops concluded, Michael gathered his team for a final debriefing. "Today was just the beginning," he stated, looking around the room. "We have to continue this dialogue and work on our biases and assumptions. We need to earn back the trust of our community." As the officers began to disperse, Michael noticed Officer Reynolds and Officer Jacobs lingering at the back of the room, their expressions unreadable. He approached them, determined to address the situation directly. "You two need to understand the gravity of your actions," he said, his voice steady. "What happened the other day was unacceptable, and it cannot be brushed aside." Reynolds crossed his arms defiantly. "You think we're the only ones? Everyone has their biases, Chief." "True," Michael replied, unwavering. "But I will not tolerate violence, especially from those who are sworn to protect. You both need to reflect on your actions and consider the consequences." Jacobs scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You're just trying to make an example out of us. This is about you, not us." Michael took a deep breath, knowing he had to remain composed. "This is about all of us. It's about creating a safe environment for every member of our community. If you can't embrace that, then I suggest you reconsider your position within this department." With that, Michael walked away, feeling a mixture of frustration and determination. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to confront them head-on. As he settled into his office later that evening, he began drafting a proposal for a formal review of department policies regarding conduct and accountability. He wanted to ensure that every officer understood the standards expected of them, and that there would be consequences for actions that betrayed the public trust. Michael knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey. The battle for justice and equality within the department would require vigilance, strength, and the support of those who believed in a better future. He was prepared to fight for that future, no matter the cost. The storm within. As dawn broke the following day, Michael Carter found himself sitting at his desk, sifting through the flurry of emails and messages that had piled up overnight. The aftermath of the workshops had sparked a mixture of reactions within the precinct. Some officers had expressed gratitude for the opportunity to reflect and grow, while others were openly resistant, clinging to the old ways and their established authority. The tension in the department was palpable, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Michael knew he had to act quickly. The division among his officers could spiral out of control if left unchecked. He picked up the phone and called Officer Sanchez, who had been instrumental in supporting the workshops. "Hey, Sanchez," Michael said, his tone serious. "We need to talk about the feedback from the workshops and address the resistance head-on. Can you meet me in my office?" "Absolutely. I'll be there in a few," Sanchez replied. As Michael hung up, he gazed out the window, lost in thought. He reflected on the stark contrast between the hope he felt during the workshops and the bitter reality of resistance from his own officers. How could he bridge the gap between those who wanted change and those who feared it? When Sanchez arrived, he closed the door behind him, a look of concern etched on his face. "What's on your mind, Chief?" "I'm worried about the split in our department," Michael replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "We need to confront the pushback directly. If we don't, it could undermine everything we're trying to accomplish." Sanchez nodded, his brow furrowing. "I've heard some rumblings. A few of the older officers think this is all a waste of time. They're set in their ways, and they're not going to change easily." Michael leaned forward, determination hardening in his gaze. "Then we need to show them why this change is necessary. I want to organize a town hall meeting, invite the community to voice their concerns, and share their experiences with our department. We can't change without understanding the impact of our actions." Sanchez looked thoughtful. "That's a bold move, but it could really help bridge the gap. If the community speaks out, it might encourage those resistant officers to reconsider their stance." "Yes, and we need to create an environment where officers feel accountable to the community they serve," Michael agreed. "Let's set it up for next week. I want to reach out to community leaders and ensure they know we're listening." As they began to plan the town hall meeting, Michael felt a surge of optimism. This could be the catalyst for a much-needed transformation. However, he also knew that not everyone would be on board. As the day progressed, Michael received notifications of a small group of officers who had organized a meeting of their own, a meeting that raised red flags in his mind. After finishing his work for the day, Michael headed to the precinct gym for a workout to clear his mind. As he entered the space, the familiar sounds of weights clanging and shoes squeaking filled the air. The gym served as a temporary refuge, a place where he could channel his frustrations into physical activity. As he began his routine, he overheard snippets of conversation from a group of officers in the corner. Their tone was hushed, but Michael's instincts kicked in. He focused on his workout, but kept an ear open for anything that might concern him. "All this training nonsense. They think they know better than us," one officer grumbled. "Yeah, it's like they want to turn us into social workers instead of cops," another chimed in, disdain dripping from his voice. Michael's heart sank. It was becoming clear that the division among his officers was not just ideological, it was turning into a palpable hostility. After finishing his set, he wiped his brow and walked over to the group, determined to address the negativity head-on. "Hey, can we have a word?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The officers exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by his sudden approach. "What do you want, Chief?" one of them asked, arms crossed defensively. "I want to understand what's going on. I'm hearing some troubling comments, and I think we need to talk about it." The first officer scoffed. "What's there to talk about? We're just doing our jobs, and now we're being told we're doing it wrong." "That's not what this is about," Michael replied firmly. "This is about growing as a department and serving our community effectively. We need to adapt to the changing times. Ignoring the issues doesn't make them go away." "Changing times? You mean bowing down to political correctness?" the officer retorted, his voice rising. "You're losing sight of what being a cop is really about." Michael felt a surge of frustration, but fought to remain calm. "This isn't about losing sight of our duties. It's about enhancing them. We can't serve our community effectively if we don't understand their needs and concerns." Another officer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "We feel like we're being attacked for doing our jobs. It's demoralizing." "It's not an attack," Michael insisted. "It's an opportunity to improve. The way we interact with our community directly impacts our effectiveness. We're supposed to protect and serve, but we can't do that if we're perceived as the enemy." The first officer stepped closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's next? You going to tell us to hug criminals instead of arresting them?" Michael took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "It's about finding common ground, about understanding that everyone has a story. Yes, we have to enforce the law, but we also need to build relationships. Trust is critical. And without it, our jobs become much harder." Silence hung in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, the second officer shrugged. "You'll see. We're not all on board with this." Michael squared his shoulders, determination flooding through him. "I understand that change is difficult, but I'm asking you to give this a chance. Come to the town hall meeting next week. Listen to the community. Their voices matter, and so do yours." As he walked away, Michael felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The confrontation had been intense, but it was necessary. If he wanted to foster change, he needed to engage with those who resisted it. He returned to his office, reflecting on the conversations he'd had that day. Later that evening, Michael sat down to draft an email to the entire department, emphasizing the importance of the upcoming town hall meeting. He wanted every officer to understand the value of engaging with the community and how it would strengthen their work as law enforcement officials. As he typed, he felt a sense of urgency driving his words. This wasn't just about policies and training. It was about building a new legacy for the department, one where respect and accountability reigned supreme. The next morning, the precinct was abuzz with discussions about the town hall meeting. Some officers were skeptical, while others expressed curiosity about what the community might say. Michael knew this was a critical moment. The way his department responded would shape their future. As he prepared for the meeting, he reflected on the various voices he had encountered. The supporters, the skeptics, and even the dissenters. Every perspective was valid, and every voice deserved to be heard. This town hall would be a chance to confront their challenges head-on. When the day finally arrived, the community center was filled with officers and citizens alike. Michael stood at the front of the room, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was the moment of truth, the tipping point that could either propel them forward or send them spiraling back into distrust. As he welcomed everyone, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "Thank you all for coming. This meeting is about open dialogue and understanding. We want to hear your experiences, your concerns, and your ideas for improving our department." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement. Michael felt a surge of hope. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The first speaker was a local resident, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson. Her voice trembled as she shared her experiences with the police. "I've lived in this community for over 30 years, and I've seen how things have changed. I want to feel safe, but sometimes I feel afraid. We need to work together." Her words resonated deeply, and the room was filled with murmurs of agreement. Michael could see some officers shifting in their seats, their expressions softening. As the evening continued, more community members shared their stories, some heartbreaking, others hopeful. They spoke of incidents that had eroded trust and others that had fostered it. Each voice added depth to the conversation, illuminating the complex relationship between the community and law enforcement. Toward the end of the meeting, a young man named Jamal stepped forward, visibly nervous but resolute. "I'm not here to criticize, but to say that we need better communication. When police approach us with respect, it makes all the difference. We want to feel like partners in our safety, not adversaries." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with pride for the community. "Thank you for your honesty, Jamal. That's exactly what we need. Collaboration. We're here to protect you. But we can't do it alone. It's a partnership." As the night drew to a close, Michael felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. The dialogue had been constructive, and the community's willingness to engage had reignited his hope for a better future. But as he glanced at Officer Reynolds and Officer Jacobs in the back, he couldn't shake the feeling that the struggle was far from over. That evening, as he returned home, Michael reflected on the town hall meeting. It had been a pivotal moment for both the community and the police department, but he knew that change would require ongoing effort. He couldn't afford to become complacent. The journey was only beginning. As he prepared for bed, he made a mental note to follow up with his officers and keep the momentum going. They needed to build on this foundation, and he was committed to ensuring that the voices of both the community and his officers were heard. Michael Carter was determined to lead his department into a new era, one marked by trust, respect, and accountability. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew that while the road ahead would be filled with challenges, he was ready to face them, one step at a time. A new dawn. The following days felt like a whirlwind for Michael Carter. The town hall meeting had ignited a spark within the community, and the ripple effects were felt throughout the precinct. Officers who had previously resisted change began to engage in conversations, some even expressing a willingness to attend further workshops and training sessions. Yet he knew the journey was far from over. As Michael settled into his routine, he began to implement a series of reforms aimed at fostering trust between the police department and the community. He collaborated with community leaders and advocacy groups to establish ongoing training programs focused on cultural competency and de-escalation techniques. These sessions would not be one-time events. They would be woven into the fabric of the department's training protocol. However, amidst the positive momentum, tension still simmered. The lingering presence of Officer Reynolds and Officer Jacobs weighed heavily on Michael's mind. Despite the department's progress, he was acutely aware that not all officers were on board. He had heard whispers of dissent within the ranks, and he needed to address this head-on. One afternoon, as he reviewed reports in his office, a knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Officer Sanchez, his expression serious. "We need to talk about Reynolds and Jacobs," he said, closing the door behind him. "They've been rallying some officers, spreading negativity about the changes you're trying to implement." Michael felt a wave of frustration wash over him. "I figured as much. We can't afford to let their resistance undermine everything we're trying to build. They need to understand that this isn't just about them. It's about the entire community." Sanchez nodded in agreement. "We need to confront them directly. If we let this continue, it could fracture the department even further. We can't allow dissent to fester in the shadows." Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself. "All right, let's call a meeting with Reynolds and Jacobs. We'll lay everything out on the table." Later that day, Michael called the two officers into his office. The atmosphere was tense as they entered, the air thick with unspoken words. Michael gestured for them to sit, his demeanor calm but resolute. "Thank you for coming," Michael began, studying their expressions. "I want to talk about the recent changes within the department and your roles in that conversation." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defensively. "What's there to talk about? We've been doing our jobs fine for years without all this extra training and sensitivity nonsense." Michael felt a spark of anger, but kept his composure. "It's not nonsense, Reynolds. This is about evolving as law enforcement professionals. The community deserves our respect, and that means adapting our approach to policing. We cannot continue to operate under outdated mindsets." Jacobs chimed in, his tone sarcastic. "So we're supposed to forget everything we know and just go along with the new agenda? What happened to upholding the law?" "The law and community relations go hand in hand," Michael replied firmly. "If we want to serve effectively, we need to build trust with the people we protect. If you're unwilling to do that, then maybe this isn't the place for you." A charged silence filled the room as the two officers exchanged glances. "We're not against serving our community," Reynolds said, his voice lower. "But we feel like this is a slippery slope. What's next? Are we supposed to let criminals run wild because we need to be sensitive?" Michael leaned forward, his tone earnest. "No, it's not about coddling criminals. It's about understanding that everyone deserves respect. We can enforce the law while also being compassionate. We're not just enforcers, we're leaders in our community." Jacobs scoffed, but Michael pressed on. I need you both to realize that your actions affect not just the community, but also every officer in this department. If we don't stand united, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Reynolds' expression softened slightly, and Michael seized the moment. "Let's use this as an opportunity for growth. I invite you both to join the next community engagement session. Hear firsthand from residents about their experiences. You might gain a new perspective." After a long pause, Reynolds nodded reluctantly. "All right, we'll attend, but we want to voice our concerns too." "Absolutely," Michael replied, relieved but cautious. "This has to be a two-way street. If we're going to make this work, we need to listen to each other." As the meeting concluded, Michael felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps this was the turning point he had been hoping for, a chance to bring everyone into the fold. He knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was committed to pushing forward. The day of the community engagement session arrived, and the turnout was impressive. Residents filled the community center, eager to share their thoughts and concerns. Michael stood at the front of the room, flanked by Officer Sanchez, Reynolds, and Jacobs. The air was charged with anticipation. "Thank you all for being here," Michael began, his voice steady. "Today is about creating a dialogue. We want to hear your experiences and your suggestions for improving our relationship with the police department." As residents took turns speaking, Michael was struck by the vulnerability and honesty displayed. They shared stories of fear, mistrust, and also hope for a better future. One mother spoke of her concerns for her son, a young black man in the community. "I want him to feel safe when he's out, but I also want him to know that he can trust the police," she said, her voice trembling. Reynolds and Jacobs listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism to empathy. Michael could see the impact the stories were having on them. It was as if the walls they had built around themselves were beginning to crack. As the session progressed, a young woman named Maria stood up. "I'm a college student, and I've had positive interactions with some officers in our community. But I also experienced moments where I felt judged or marginalized. It's crucial for us to work together and communicate." Michael nodded, acknowledging her courage. "Thank you for sharing that, Maria. It's stories like yours that remind us why we need to improve our approach." After a long evening of sharing, the session concluded with a renewed sense of hope. The community and police officers had begun to bridge the gap, and Michael felt a sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but one that could lead to significant change. In the days that followed, Michael received positive feedback from both the community and his officers. Even Reynolds and Jacobs seemed to be shifting their attitudes, participating more actively in discussions about reform and accountability. However, challenges still lurked on the horizon. Michael had received anonymous tips about a faction within the department that was still resistant to the changes. Rumors swirled that they were planning to undermine his leadership, sowing discord among officers. He knew he had to confront this head-on. Michael decided to call for a department-wide meeting to address the concerns. As he prepared his notes, he felt a mix of apprehension and determination. This would be a crucial moment, and he needed to rally his officers behind a shared vision of progress. On the day of the meeting, officers filled the precinct's main hall, a mix of tension and anticipation hanging in the air. Michael stood at the front, his heart pounding as he scanned the faces before him. Some looked supportive, while others appeared skeptical. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "I want to address some of the concerns I've heard over the past few weeks. Change can be unsettling, but it's necessary for us to grow and serve our community effectively." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "I understand that some of you may feel threatened by the direction we're headed, but I assure you, this is not about diminishing your roles as officers. It's about enhancing our capabilities as a department." The room was silent, all eyes on him. Michael continued, "We're building a foundation of trust that benefits not just the community, but each one of you. If we don't adapt, we risk becoming irrelevant and disconnected from those we serve." After he spoke, he opened the floor for questions. The atmosphere shifted as officers began to voice their concerns, some challenging Michael's vision while others supported it. Michael listened attentively, taking notes and responding thoughtfully to each point raised. When Officer Reynolds finally spoke up, it surprised everyone. I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but after attending the town hall and hearing from the community, I see the value in what we're trying to do. We need to work together. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Michael felt a surge of hope as he watched other officers nod in support. As the meeting drew to a close, Michael felt a renewed sense of unity within the department. They weren't all on the same page yet, but the willingness to engage in dialogue was a significant step forward. In the days that followed, Michael worked diligently to implement the reforms discussed in the meetings. He introduced a mentorship program that paired experienced officers with younger recruits, fostering a culture of learning and growth. He also emphasized the importance of community policing, encouraging officers to engage with residents outside of the typical enforcement context. As the months passed, Michael watched as the department began to transform. The once palpable tension was replaced with a newfound camaraderie among officers. They began to take pride in their work, embracing the changes and recognizing the importance of their roles as community leaders. One afternoon, while walking through the precinct, Michael was stopped by a rookie officer named Jordan. "Chief, I just wanted to say thanks for everything you've done. The new training programs are really helpful. I feel more equipped to handle tough situations." Michael smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "I'm glad to hear that, Jordan. Remember, we're all in this together. If you ever have suggestions or ideas, don't hesitate to speak up." As the seasons changed, Michael felt the warmth of progress settling in. The department's relationship with the community had improved significantly, and the feedback from residents reflected that. The once strained interactions were now filled with understanding and respect. However, Michael knew that challenges would always arise. He remained vigilant, aware that complacency could easily creep in. He scheduled regular check-ins with officers to discuss ongoing concerns and encourage open dialogue. One evening, as Michael was wrapping up for the day, he received a call from Maria, the college student who had shared her experiences during the town hall meeting. "Chief Carter, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. The changes are really making a difference. I feel safer in our community." Her words warmed Michael's heart. "Thank you, Maria. It means a lot to hear that. We're committed to continuing this work and making our community a better place for everyone." As he hung up, Michael felt a surge of pride. He realized that this was not just about him or the department. It was about the community they served. The progress they had made together was a testament to the power of collaboration and understanding. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael reflected on the journey he had undertaken. The road had been fraught with challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of hope and connection. He knew that the fight for justice and equality would never truly end, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a sense of renewed purpose, Michael closed his eyes, dreaming of a brighter future for his department and the community they served. Together, they had begun to forge a new path, one marked by respect, accountability, and unwavering commitment to the ideals of justice. As dawn broke, illuminating the world outside, Michael was filled with a sense of optimism. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and he was determined to lead the way.